can't believe you just called Edna Mode a secondary character. That's, I think, the only thing that I have to argue about that. I absolutely 100% am arguing with Incredibles here.
Ever since Toy Story was released in 1995, Pixar has become the gold standard in digital animation. In the intervening 20-plus years, the studio's films have included some of the most iconic animated movies in history, and several of them have become box office blockbusters that please audiences of all ages. Now, as the studio quickly approaches its 30th anniversary, the Great Pop Culture Debate podcast wants to decide what is the best Pixar film of all time. You'll need to subscribe to OnlyFans to watch the movie in which the toys in my dresser come to life at night. I'm your host, Eric Resniak. Please help me welcome my panel for this episode. She doesn't like confrontation, and yet she continues to join us here. It's Amma Marfo.
You'd think with all my debate experience, I'd be feeling more prepared for this.
That's true, but Amma, can you press the fire button and jump at the same time?
Of course I can.
Of course. Next, she's a mama bear, but not a mother who actually turns into a bear. It's Amy Pilot.
Hi, and yes, I can attest that little princesses don't always do what they're told.
They do not. How brave of you. And finally, she's the greatest good you're ever going to get. It's Andrea Guerrero.
Eric, I only have one request tonight. No capes.
Well, I love you, Andrea, but as a homosexual, I cannot guarantee that. And joining us from his house in the clouds, it's our cantankerous, grizzle-faced producer, Curtis Craigmore. You can't hear him, but he's verbally assaulting a child at this very moment. So before we get to the debates, how does this work? We made a poll of every Pixar film released as of June 2023 when we're recording this, all the way from Toy Story up to Elemental. Our listeners picked their favorites, we tallied the votes, ranked them by popularity, and then added them to a bracket. Now we argue about it and insult each other all for your amusement. Want to play along at home? You can. Head to greatpopculturedebate.com and go to polls and brackets. There you'll find the downloadable listener brackets for this and every episode of our little show. Do your picks match up with ours? Do you think we give Dory a run in the brains department? Let us know by dropping a comment on this episode at our website or by yelling at us on Twitter, Instagram, or Mastodon. With that out of the way, we're going to go to infinity and beyond and move on to these debates. First, it's a unanimous victory for ultimate number 1 seed Finding Nemo, which proved too strong for 4 seed Brave to bear. Next, 3/4 of the panel feels enlightened to advance 2 seed Up, but Andrea is seriously in her feels and prefers 3 seed Inside Out. Andrea, tell me which emotions you are feeling now and whether we are at risk of losing one of your core memories. Amma, adventure awaits. Take Up higher, and into round 2, I'm going to have Andrea go first.
I knew I was going to stand alone on this island, but hear me out. This movie is so front-loaded, okay? The first 15 minutes of this movie, fantastic. Best 15 minutes of almost all the Pixar movies in the entire franchise, 100%. Other than that, I don't remember a lot from this movie. I've watched it a few times. I didn't watch it too recently for this episode. Even just thinking about like the funny moments that I could remember, they all happened in the first 15-30 minutes of the movie, and then the house takes off, and then it's just a cranky old man, an annoying kid, and a couple of like funny animals.
You're describing Up. I just want to make sure everybody understands. She's putting forward Inside Out by dragging down Up, which is completely fine. We love that on the Great Pop Culture Debate.
I wanted to get that out there first before I went into Inside Out. So that's my reasonings for not liking Up. I think it's a very overhyped Pixar movie. I see it rated at the top on like every Pixar list that comes out, and I don't quite understand why. Maybe I'm just uncultured swine, but Inside Out, I think, is a truly rooted in reality Pixar movie. And I think it's one of the first ones, maybe other than The Incredibles, that really deals with human emotions directly and deals with mental illness directly without calling it what it is and making it still relatable for the younger audience and even the adult audience. I think it addresses the idea of toxic positivity. I think Amy Poehler is a very good analogy for toxic positivity. I think she's changed a lot within the last recent years, but she was very much like, she kind of encapsulated the Parks and Rec character And I think that's kind of what she was known for. And then she kind of plays that same character a little bit in Inside Out. And then the other emotions come into play to sort of balance it out. And I just think it's a really great movie that teaches kids about emotional regulation, why you need to feel things other than just happiness, why it's okay to be sad or angry or disgusted or fear. So I think it addresses all of these things really well in a way that kids can relate to them. And we got the character Bing Bong out of this movie, who I love this character. He breaks my heart every time. I cry big fat Pixar tears every time that scene rolls around. And I think he's like the perfect representation for what an imaginary friend should be, just unwaveringly supportive of you when you don't feel supported in your real life. So, and I also love that this movie doesn't have a real villain in it. There's no real like central character villain. It is really just a girl dealing with her emotions. And up until that point, I don't think we really saw that in a lot of, especially kid-oriented movies, and especially in Pixar movies. There's a lot of cutesy stuff. This is still cutesy and deals with the fun side of things while still addressing some really heavy stuff.
Yeah, you did a great job. And it's, I think we need to say this. This is only a top 16, not a top 32. There's no fat on these bones. These are all great picks. Every single one of them on here. Even the ones that are going to get knocked out by unanimous are great movies. And this was a tough one for me because I suspect everybody on this panel does. Amma?
Well, while I do really like Inside Out, I mean, there aren't any movies on this bracket that I just don't like. So anytime I have to make an argument, I will cede respect and probably love to the opposite movie. But I feel like some of the arguments that you made for Inside Out, or rather against Up, I would make against Inside Out in the sense that I don't remember a whole lot of Inside Out. Like it didn't stick in the way that Up did for me. I also feel like one of the criteria that I imagine is going to come up a couple times for this is I love animation. I talk about it a lot. And for me, one of the valuable things about Pixar is there's a point where it kind of transcends animation and you kind of forget that it's animated. And there were so many points in Up where I was like, this is gorgeous landscape. Like these animals look like they could exist in like a quote unquote real world. And it just kind of elevates the form in a way that Inside Out doesn't as much. And it doesn't have to, but for me, that's one of the things that kind of like fit my criteria. The other thing that I would say about Up is I think it deals with like a different sort of like complicated emotion in terms of like how do you deal with grief on multiple fronts. So that is grief of losing a loved one, but also having a child in your life when you're also probably still grieving that, the fact that you couldn't have kids in your life. And that's a really intricate conversation to have. So I think that being able to explore puberty, which is this immensely complicated thing, in a relatively understandable and palatable form is its own kind of impressive feat, but so is addressing grief with kids. And like, that's a really interesting piece as well. You're right. It does have a villain in the way that Inside Out does it, but it has Christopher Plummer as a villain. Amazing. One of Christopher Plummer's last roles, absolutely incredible talent. It was very nice to see him in that. Ed Asner, again, too, like just roles for older folks, which I also really love. But yeah, there's just something deeply special about Up, not just the part that like your stomach hurts crying within the first 15 minutes, because I do feel like it's kind of like a heartstring grab, and I think that's something that people tend to hold against it. They're like, it goes too hard too quickly. Once Pixar realized that it could do that to people, they're just like, all right, let's pull that hard on this one. And I acknowledge that, but I also think that like it properly places that within the rest of the movie. Like it has to hurt so the rest of it means something. So yeah, I feel like it's at times a literally transcendent experience in the way that Inside Out wasn't for me.
Amy, you are you still going to switch to Inside Out here?
Using your rubric, and like I think it's all about that. It's all of our personal. So for me, what's different about Pixar films is that they can explain certain things to kids, and they explain things to my kids, and they cause conversation. Up definitely does about the grief without a doubt, but there's something about the way that Inside Out spurs conversation about feelings, and it has become a regular conversation in our house. Also, it's getting a sequel, and I'm very excited about that. for me, it's just about my personal rubric that, and for whatever reason, Up has never spurred the same conversations in my house and given us those opportunities that Inside Out did.
So it's really interesting. I am not mad at either one of these advancing. Let me be really clear about that. I think they're pretty evenly matched. And I went into this, I actually did not see Up until I was doing my research for this episode, swear to God. And I had not watched it because everyone had said to me, oh, you need to see Up. It's so good, but the first 15 minutes are so depressing. And so I was just like, do I want to be depressed? No, I'm not. Let me put on Ralph Breaks the Internet or whatever. But I finally watched it, and I think people had hyped those first 15 minutes so much that I was just like, this is sad. I'm not dead inside, but I'm not like wrecked the way that everyone said I was going to be. And I actually, you pointed out, Andrea, correctly, like it's a cantankerous old man on an adventure, and I'm like, I see myself in this film. Like, but in all reality, like, yes, it is about mourning not only your partner, but the loss of a potential child in your life. But it's also about, to me, what it was saying was like, do not be putting off your grand adventure, even if it's for perfectly good logistical reasons why you can't make it happen today. But like, at a certain point, you're going to run out of runway. And if you don't have that adventure, it is not going to happen. And I feel like in that way, Up is actually a really joyful movie. It is about, you know, a man who's basically losing everything and is like clinging to his like one great childhood thought process. But it actually ends up being this really lovely, warm story about finding family when you don't expect it, and a second act when you thought that the curtain had already closed. And as someone who doesn't have kids and is probably never going to have kids and was never a young girl, that speaks to me more than Inside Out does. I am very much open to this. So I think right now it's Amma and I for Up, and it is Andrea and Amy for Inside Out. Inside Out is a 3 seed and Up is a 2 seed. So by the rules, Up would continue no matter what. That means Inside Out is out. Up will advance to round 2. Next, 75% of the panel is pulling on the spandex and jumping into the action to defend 1 seed, The Incredibles, but Amma wants us to step carefully and be on the lookout for 4 seed, A Bug's Life. I will explain why The Incredibles are Pixar's first family. Amma, do you want us to get ants? Explain to us why we should get ants and also get A Bug's Life. I'm going to have Amma go first.
I've always really loved A Bug's Life. Like from the beginning when it first came out, there was just so much for me to enjoy with it. It's really funny, really sharply written. Like the ensemble that they put together to be the bugs of like that traveling group was perfectly cast, and they kind of like cooperated in a way not unlike the group itself did, just in a way that was really, really fun. And I've always really, really enjoyed it. And I also think about this too. One of the things that also kind of factored into my arguments was technical achievements involved with these, because I know a lot about Disney Pixar, so a lot of the behind the scenes kind of leaks into this for me. And especially with the early Pixar films, there was like a technical challenge for each one. For The Incredibles, it was human hair. They'd never had to animate it before because Toy Story didn't really need it, and other things just didn't call for it, and that was like their challenge. But the crowd scenes in A Bug's Life were the challenge. The animators working on it were like, we're stuck. We don't know if this is going to happen. We don't know if we can do it. And the supervising director was like, if you really can't do it, we will find a way around it, but I think you can. And that group was able to come together and figure out how to make that work. So like from the standpoint of someone who's like really interested in leadership and the kind of things that can come from it, so much of like the galvanizing action of A Bug's Life almost didn't happen. And it just took the right person being like, we think you can do this to make it happen. But yeah, it's fun. Heimlich is one of my all-time favorite Pixar characters. Rest in peace to Joe Ranft, who voiced him, who is no longer with us, but absolutely excellent. So I'm aware that it's not the most popular choice, but I do want to speak on its behalf.
And I'm glad you did. I think of Bug's Life as the Rodney Dangerfield of Pixar movies. It never gets any respect, ever. But it is so charming. And even I remember seeing it in the theater, and I was just like, this is sweet. And another Julia Louis-Dreyfus moment, right? And it's just, I think that one movie that everybody forgets because it's their first non-Toy Story film, right? And it just kind of gets lost.
Yeah, second full length overall, so it came right after Toy Story. And again, Toy Story was like such a juggernaut that like whatever came after it was like going to feel like it paled in comparison, but I don't think it actually does.
No, I mean, and it doesn't feel like a failure both when you're watching it, and it was performed well too. It's just then immediately after that was Nemo, and immediately after that, I think, was Up, and then it was like they were on fire for those first few years. It's unfortunately up against The Incredibles. The Incredibles is Pixar's take on comic books, and this is before there ever was an MCU, and before Disney even acquired Marvel. But underneath the superpowers and the spectacular action sequences, it's really a film about family and navigating surprisingly ordinary struggles. A husband and wife who miss the freedom and excitement of their life before kids, a shy daughter making the difficult transition to teendom, a baby who's just chaos personified, and Dash. So as a lifelong comic fan, The Incredibles hit just about every note right for me. Viewers who came to the film after the MCU debuted might think that it's all been there, done that. But I would argue that up until its debut, nobody had made a better superhero film better than The Incredibles. And I think it still holds up really well. It's fast-paced, it's funny, the secondary characters like Edna Mode are great, and in the end, it's a great story about how even when they're challenged, families are stronger when they stick together. So to me, I think it's super successful. Amy, where are you on this one?
I can't believe you just called Edna Mode a secondary character. That's, I think, the only thing that I have to argue about that. I absolutely 100% am arguing. We'll go with Incredibles here. Listen, you cannot compete with Edna Mode in my book. That was my favorite, by the way, character meet and greet that I've ever had. Was meeting Edna Mode in Disney World, and I pushed my children out of the photos.
Get out of the way.
Get out. It's me and Edna.
I love it. Andrea, where are you on this one?
I'm sticking with The Incredibles. Not only is it just, The Incredibles is one of my favorite movies just of all time. I preferred Ants to A Bug's Life, personally. So, just gonna throw that out there. God. Listen, it had Jennifer Lopez. It had
Woody Allen,
Sharon Stone, Sylvester Stallone, Danny Glover was in there.
I was going to say, like, famously relatable to children actors, Woody Allen and Sylvester Stallone.
We had Kevin Spacey in A Bug's Life, so I think that's a wash at that point.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah,
you can't argue that. We got some hot takes with low stakes tonight. That's what we try to do here on the Great Pop Culture Debate. I love it. So I believe that is 3 for The Incredibles, and that will advance into round 2. Next, it's another 3-quarter split, as most of the panel wants to unleash the panda and move forward 3-seed Turning Red. But Amy thinks that 2-seed Ratatouille has better taste. Andrea, summon your inner 4-town fan and cheer on Tearing Red. Amy, explain why Ratatouille still has the recipe for success. I'm going to have Amy go first.
I'm going into this knowing that I'm not going to sway anyone's vote here. I just really do want to put the vote out there for Ratatouille. I think this is, and it really doesn't. My bracket, Turning Red, probably should be the thing that I put forward, because it'll, brings on conversation and it's thought provoking and all of those things. Ratatouille is just adorable. It's a rat in a hat, and he's controlling a kitchen. I do think that there is like a cultural piece to it that I personally enjoyed for my kids. And actually, if you are a fan of the pod, you know that I traveled to Disney Paris. This was like a big thing that connected for my kids, was like, oh, that's Ratatouille. We went on the Ratatouille ride. They put, it was actually one of the first, I believe it was the first Pixar that was not scored by Randy Newman or his brother. It is a collaboration of music, including French singer, the whole French culture piece of it, food. I think that it's a sweet, fun movie. With that said, I know that it does not have the same Pixar-ness that they've perfected by Turning Red.
It's a really great way to put it. And although I will say you almost swayed me by pointing out that this is not a Randy Newman joint. So
it's not.
Yeah, that is compelling. But Andre, do you want to talk to us a little bit about Turning Red?
First, we do not tolerate Randy Newman slander on this podcast. Don't you dare.
Someone I know just heard Short People for the first time. I saw this tweet. It might have been Kevin from our podcast, literally tweeted out, I just listened to Randy Newman's Short People for the first time, and I am deeply personally insulted. So anyway, go on.
I actually just watched Ratatouille for the first time today, like 2 to 3 hours before recording this podcast, because it was one of, I think, 2 on here that I've never actually seen. And I really enjoyed it, but Turning Red, I feel like, was just such a pivot for Pixar, I feel. We kind of alluded to it earlier. It's one of 2 movies that deal with the relationship between mother and daughter, and it deals with pretty directly girls going through puberty. I mean, that's kind of the whole metaphor of the movie, more or less. It's smart, it's funny, it's Canadian, it's everything that we love. It's so diverse too, even just the characters throughout the background. There's a scene where I think they're in the bathroom and one of the girls is wearing the diabetes patch. I don't know what they're called, the little insulin patch or whatever. And then there's like a couple of kids in wheelchairs at the not BTS concert. There's all these different cultures represented. And I feel like as far as human movies go with Pixar, it is definitely the most diverse one. It is the most relatable one. And it is just really interesting to see the way that they approach generational trauma as well in that movie. When it comes to child of immigrants or just people that are not originally from that country. It is, again, another one of those movies that I feel like addresses really rooted in reality issues in a sensitive way that makes it relatable for kids and adults. And that's what we all love about Pixar, right? Is that everyone can enjoy a Pixar movie on all different levels. And I feel like it is one of those movies that will age really well too. Whereas I can't say the same for all the other movies on this bracket.
And this was another one that was in the COVID hole, right? It went directly to Disney Plus. It was never in theaters. I think you know what? I'm not going to do my stuff. Amma, where are you on this one?
So this is a movie that in many ways kind of felt like it was made for me. A kid of immigrants, born in Canada, had to work on her relationship with her mom and loves boy bands. Like, this has... to put a Stefan point on it, like, this film has everything. And I do really like Ratatouille. I also really like food. I also am watching The Bear. But there's something so deeply personal about Turning Red. Again, it's doing like a really complicated thing of being able to handle going through puberty and generational trauma and building out a world where you feel like you fit. That's a lot. Also, to your point about diversity, Andrew, this is, I want to say, relatively early on in like their series of having directors of color, because for a long time it was just like the same 3 or 4 white dudes that were doing it. But between Kemp Powers working on Soul and her name is escaping me now, but the director of Turning Red, those that worked on Coco, now most recently with Elemental, like, they're recognizing that, like, when you have a director who has a different experience, you get a very different type of movie. And I think this to date was like the most powerful example of that. So as somebody who went to film school and studied literally all white male directors for the entirety of my film minor, that's an achievement that I can't look away from. So for me, Turning Red absolutely wins.
Again, these are all terrific. It's a top 16. There's no fat, as the people of Ratatouille would actually say. It's a problem because fat is flavor. But I think I put on Turning Red for the first time flying back from London, my most recent trip, and I had to stop it within 20 minutes. Because I said, I can't watch this without my boyfriend. He will love this. And so I literally stopped it and restarted it with him when we got home. And we were just howled through the movie. It is so great. And so for me, it just has a little bit more of the humor and the heart that I think Pixar really excels at. So for that reason, I'm sticking with Turning Red, which means that we'll advance to round 2. Next 3/4 of the panel wants to keep playing with OG Pixar film Toy Story, a 1 seed, but I think newbie Luca, a 4 seed, makes a bigger splash. Andrea, explain why Toy Story still has a friend in you, and actually I'm going to have you hold on to the argument because we're running a little bit long, and I know I'm not going to sway anybody as I do my Mambo Italiano in the hopes of getting Luca into round 2. So let me just go ahead and throw myself on the fire here. This is not going to advance. I'm okay with that, but here's my 2 main points for voting the way that I did. Number one, I think the original Toy Story suffers from having two sequels that are actually better than the original. And therefore, I don't think it holds up that well in comparison. Secondly, Toy Story had and continues to have a massive amount of hype. There is an entire land in Disney based around this property. That's incredible. Whereas Luca was a pandemic era movie that really nobody saw coming, and I don't know how many people saw it, period. But much like the film's plot, I'm rooting for the underdog here. If you've not seen Luca, I recommend it. I don't know if the marketing did a good job selling what this film is about. It is about sea monsters, but you're out of the water within like 20 minutes of the film. And it's a literal fish out of water story about a young boy with big dreams who ends up in a small Italian village where he is befriended by a similarly quirky young girl who dreams of winning a big race and taking down an awful bully. There's a lot more going on to it, but that's the bare bones. It is charming. It's beautiful. And it speaks to wanderlust and wanting to understand the world around us. Again, that universal truth that I think Pixar is so good at. It's up against Toy Story. So, Amy, I'm assuming you're sticking with Toy Story?
I am. Luca is adorable and cute. And to my point about Ratatouille with culture, I think that Luca has a lot of that. We probably would have gotten a Vespa if, my kids had their way. But it's adorable. It's just, it's not Toy Story.
Yeah. Amma, are you sticking with Toy Story here?
Yeah.
Andrea, I assume you're sticking with Toy Story.
Yeah, I watched Luca a couple days ago for the first time. And super cute movie, but I'm going to stick with Toy Story. I'll save all those arguments for later.
Well, we will advance Toy Story into round two. Finally, in round one, it is a slew of unanimous decisions. 2-seed WALL-E cleaned up against 3-seed Toy Story 2. 1-seed Monsters, Inc. had more heart than 4-seed Soul. And we won't have to remember 2-seed Coco because it's outliving 3-quel Toy Story 3, which is a 3-seed. And that's the end of round one, folks. We're going to take a quick break so we can chase down that infernal hopping desk lamp. We'll be right back after these messages. And we are back for round two of our best Pixar film debate. Before we get into the Elite Eight, I want our panelists to share their social media so that people can find you online, just like Nemo. And also, please fill us in on what else you're working on. Amma, how can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram and YouTube at Amma Marfo. I have a half-hour comedy special on my YouTube channel called Enjoy Your Nachos. Please go watch it. It's a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you. And Amy, talk to us about your socials and what else you're working on.
Sure. So you could find me on Instagram at Amy Pilot. That's Pilot with 2 T's. And you can join me and Cody Rigsby on a Peloton ride. Amy Spins 83. There's lots of Disney content over on Peloton for those of you who spin. And, listen, Pixar is emotional. So if you want to talk about behavioral health, I work in the behavioral health space, and we could talk about how to advance that care. Just find me.
Love it. Love it. Andrea, talk to us. How can people find you?
I guess you can still find me on Twitter at Dre Souffle. I might be the only one left standing on the podcast that's on Twitter, but I'm still there, baby.
I'm still there, too.
Yep. I am doing some can designing for the brewery that I work at, Coopersville Brewing Company in Michigan. We are located across from a literal dump. I also have an Etsy shop where you can buy some designs, Dre Souffle designs.
And Andrea has designed a couple stickers for us, which you can get if you are a Patreon supporter of this here podcast, which you should be. So thank you for that. You can find me at Eric Resniak. That's ERICREZ as in zebra, S as in snake, N as in Nancy, YAK on Twitter or Instagram. But really, you should just message at Great Pop Culture Debate on Insta or at GPCD over on Mastodon. Now let's move into round two before Syndrome launches his next attack. 3/4 of the panel continues to think that it's better down where it's wetter. Oops, wait, wrong Disney property. With 1-seed Finding Nemo, but I want to continue exploring the adventures of 2-seed Up. Amma, explain why Finding Nemo remains a deep favorite for you. I will follow that bird and try to bring Up to round 3. Amma, take it away.
So I watch a lot of movies, tremendous number, and there are only 2 movies in my life that I have watched and then just turned back around and started over and watched again. One of those is Forgetting Sarah Marshall, and the other is Finding Nemo. There is no connection between the two. That's just who I am as a person. But yeah, Finding Nemo, it sounds very weird to say that it's a fun movie when you consider that a mass murder happens within the first 10 minutes. Like 401 characters die. And from there, it just seems like it would be a tremendous bummer, but there's so much to love about it. Again, like a good ensemble of characters, I think is really fun. I think that the lesson that it's sharing about like parents being able to let go and being a very sheltered kid, I was like, hell yeah, do that. Yeah, there's just a lot to love about it. The scene with the boat, like right before Nemo gets taken, like it's harrowing in the moment that it happens, but that scene like leading up to it is hysterical. Like anytime someone is telling me like not to do something, even if it's on Zoom, this is an audio medium and I'm about to do a visual thing, but I'll just like do the same thing where I like put a hand out and then just like reach upward and pretend that I'm hitting something. So it's like, you try and make me stop. No, I'm going to be Nemo level rebellious about this. Even just the scene where it's like Marlin is trying to get a joke out and it's too wordy and he's going too far into explaining it. And I'm just like, dude, as a comedian, I was like, this isn't going to work. And then when he gets it at the end, it's so rewarding. I was like, you figured it out. You love to see it. But yeah, it's a really nice movie about like letting your kid grow up and letting them find like who they are as a person. And then it being a really rewarding opportunity when that kid surprises you and does exactly what you hope that they would do. Yeah, I love it so much.
I like Finding Nemo. I hope nobody thinks that I'm taking anything away from it. I think it's a great film. We talked a lot about Up in Round One, but with that personal rubric, so much of it for me is what movies did I connect to emotionally on a level. And as someone who does not have a child and will never have a child, Finding Nemo, I think it's really mostly for parents and or kids that it resonates the most with. And obviously I'm generalizing. But Up definitely resonated with me much more powerfully. I do think it has a great emotional arc. I do think that it has great action sequences. Like, I hear what Andrea was saying. Like, I don't remember a lot about Up after like that first 20 power-packed minutes, but there's a lot of like one after another action and peril sequences. But the same thing is true for Nemo, honestly. Like it really is a nonstop roller coaster. So with all that being said, I'm kind of waving the white flag here, but where are you on this one, Andrea?
I'm sticking with Finding Nemo. I mean, I tried to get Up out in round one, so.
And Amy, where are you on this one?
Nemo, and I've got a list to go on Nemo if we gotta keep going on this one. So.
All right, fair enough. So we will advance Finding Nemo to round 3. Next, the majority of the panel wants One Seed The Incredibles to continue fighting the good fight, but Amma is compelled by the spirit of the red panda to push 3 Seed Turning Red into the final 4. Amma, why does the powerful panda trump the Parr family? Andrea, I know we said no to capes, but why should we continue saying yes to the Incredibles? I'm going to have Amma go first. You talked a little bit about Turning Red in round 1 as well, but what else have you got?
Yeah, I mean, again, just to me, the idea that earlier Pixar, for the most part, kind of centered white characters. And I think that the move that they're making towards recognizing, like, a lot of people want to see themselves on film. I think to date, Turning Red was the best example of that. So the idea of, and not even just like cursory representation, like other people are there, but really getting a story that is very specific to a cultural experience that's a little bit more broad. So even as an African immigrant, seeing this experience of like Asian immigrants, like the idea of how to fit and where you still bring your culture with you and where you want to rebel and how your parents deal with that and all of those things. To that point, Eric, it's not a universal experience, but I think the specificity of it is so special that I was like, I can't overlook this. And it's not to say that like being part of a family in its own right isn't a universal experience, but I think in some instances, the specificity is a little bit more valuable. And for me, just so many pieces of that were meticulously put together. Like the idea of a boy band that sounds so close to a boy band that actually exists, that those songs then popped off like in real life. And it's catchy stuff. Like, I feel like I listened to the Four Town song for like weeks afterwards. Like sometimes I'll get into a groove and my brain doesn't want to listen to anything else, and like that's what was going on. It's like, oh no, just Four Town. Like none of your podcasts, none of your other music, we're listening to Four Town. So they nailed it. They like, I love a boy band and I also love a fake boy band, and they did it so well.
They did indeed. Andrea, talk to me about The Incredibles.
Like I was saying earlier, The Incredibles is just one of my favorite movies of all time. It is so different than all the other Pixar movies. I know kind of say this about other ones in the bracket, but this one really is. It's one of the earlier human Pixar movies when they kind of like started to gear away from just animals or toys. And we get to see a true family dynamic. These kids are trying to navigate their lives as kids and as preteens and whatever, while also still having superhero powers and having retired superhero parents. I don't know if anyone's like recently watched this movie. It's dark. There is a point where Helen is like trying to protect the kids while they're like fighting against the soldiers or the cops. And she says, those soldiers won't hesitate to kill you. Like literally says that, which in 2023 holds a whole other context and meaning. But I just think that this movie addresses family dynamics in a very approachable and relatable way. And if we're going to compare soundtracks, like, yeah, the Turning Red soundtrack is great, but Incredibles has like true jazz pieces in it. We played some of these songs in jazz band in high school. And I'll just wrap it up by saying thick thighs save lives in The Incredibles, you know?
It's true.
I cannot argue with you there.
Amen.
I would never.
Nope.
You're absolutely right.
That's right. Amy, where are you on this one?
Incredibles.
Yeah. I adore Turning Red, and I will be curious in 5 years' time to see how the reputation for that property has progressed, because it could easily have a sequel. It could easily have its own franchise going. It's lovely. But in this moment in time, I am going to give it to The Incredibles. So Incredibles will advance to the final four. Next, it's an even split between 1 seed Toy Story and 2 seed WALL-E. Amy, why should we keep Woody, Buzz, and the other toys in our chest? Andrea, I won't ask you to save the planet, but I will ask you to save WALL-E from elimination here. I'm going to have Amy go first.
So I just want to say that this is, to me, this could be the final two. And I do truly believe that. This is where, I mean, you don't have Pixar without Toy Story. It launched them. I don't think, to your point earlier, if Bug's Life was the first one out of the gate, I don't think that we would be where we are because of what it launched. I mean, we talk a lot about seeing yourself in the characters, and this is a movie that every child relates to. Off the bat, you see these toys, they come to life. Like, what kid doesn't believe that their toys have their own personalities? And they managed, even in one, before they had Barbie, before they had some of the bigger name toys, they managed to bring everybody in to the Fisher-Price phone and the little green men that didn't have names and didn't have characters or personas, but they gave them life. And just a cowboy. Just a cowboy, like, who becomes this little hero and a spaceman who thinks he's truly a spaceman. And, like, this is where they started to layer all of those Pixar emotional family dynamics. Single mom, sister, and then you've got the next door neighbor who is just off the rails, but doing his own thing. And I've seen the kid who does the weird things with the dolls, and I go, okay, she's living her best life. I'm just going to say, I've got to step back. So it took a movie about what every child was doing in life and made it happen. I can't say enough good things about this movie and what it has given to the entire Toy Story franchise, the Toy Story lands, the Toy Story dolls. This movie, it came out in 1995. And there are kids in 2023 having Toy Story birthday parties. I could go on and on. The cast was unbelievable. The cast is unbelievable. So I'm going to leave it there because, again, I'm hoping that we are going to move this forward and that we'll continue to talk about it.
Thank you. I want to pass it off to Andrea to talk about WALL-E.
I think Amma put a comment in her bracket for this matchup where she said, like, this is where her heart started to break, just like trying to figure out like who was going to advance. And that is So true. I'm like listening to your argument, Amy, and I feel like I'm almost swayed, but hear me out. So we would not have Wall-E if it weren't for Toy Story. And I feel like Toy Story as a jumping off point and then building up in the Pixar universe, we were always meant to get to Wall-E from Toy Story. Does that make sense? Like, it is just visually stunning movie. It addresses these really huge concepts of global warming, overpopulation, AI, being lazy, pollution. Like, literally, it was a really big stance for Disney Pixar to kind of come out and take this take of, hey, if we don't do something, this is where we're going to end up. But all that being said, this film, because I really do believe this is, you know, you have movies and you have films. I think this is more of on the film side of Pixar. The economy of dialogue in this movie is just so well done. I think it's like the first like 20 minutes of the movie like has no dialogue or something like that. Probably even more than that, honestly. The soundtrack is beautiful. The love letter to old films kind of withstanding the test of time, even at this point where like humans are no longer populating the planet. And then sort of talking about the mega corporations and how they're still sponsoring humans, even in like a post-apocalyptic scenario. Like, it is really just a very nuanced movie that has a take on humanity that we haven't really seen in Disney Pixar up until that point. But this is another franchise that I feel like is going to keep going, and kids are still going to really love the characters themselves of Wall-E and Eve. Yeah, I just really, truly love this movie. There's a line in this movie where the captain is like trying to take back control of the ship, and he says, "I don't want to survive, I want to live." Like, that's a really fun line for a Pixar movie. But all that being said, you know, if it wasn't for Toy Story, we wouldn't have this. But I really do believe that we were kind of always meant to get to Wall-E on this journey from Toy Story.
So these are two really great arguments. Let me put that right out there. It's fitting. I agree with Amy completely. This could be a final two. It would be absolutely justified. But Amma, let me take it to you and get your where are you on this one?
Best Pixar film. And I am of the belief that Wall-E is an out and out, to your point, Andrea, beautiful film. Full stop. Whereas when you're thinking about something being really iconic within the context of Pixar, Toy Story is that. But Wall-E, in a lot of ways, like a criterion that I've put forth earlier, transcends that. Like, it's so much bigger than just being a Disney Pixar film. And I remember that this did end up winning in the 2009 Oscars for the 2008 films. It did end up winning Best Animated Feature, but there was a really serious conversation about it being nominated outright for Best Film, which hadn't happened for an animated movie since Beauty and the Beast, and did not happen again until Toy Story 3 years later. So the idea that Pixar was going to get to do that, and that was the movie that was going to get them there, Wall-E, like, that to me is so much bigger than one studio. That's like moving forward film as a whole. So that sounds like an endorsement for Wall-E, and in any other bracket it would be, but for me, like, the best Pixar film, Toy Story is that. Wall-E it's moving in a class of its own. So I'm going for Toy Story here.
That's really helpful, and I it's frustrating because if you look at my bracket, I have Wall-E going all the way. It was my pick to win the whole thing. And I will say this, I did not watch Wall-E at first because I was just like, this just looks like a ripoff of Short Circuit, if anybody remembers that movie from the 1980s. Like, Wall-E looks so much like Johnny Five. I was just like, pass. And then I watched it and I was just like, oh no, this movie is amazing. Like, this movie is deeply moving. And I agreed with everything that Andrea said, like real, legit social commentary going on there. Yeah, you did an awesome job defending it. But Amy had me hello when she said that yes, we can say that Toy Story is the first, but if Bug's Life was the first Pixar film, Pixar would not be Pixar. It had to be Toy Story. And I think she is dead right there because, like, you look at those first few movies, Toy Story had something very special that gave it a universal appeal that Amy also spoke to. And I cannot ditch that before Final Four of this bracket. Toy Story has to take it. So I believe that is 3 for Toy Story, 1 for WALL-E. I'm betraying WALL-E here. I'm sorry, Andrea. I failed.
No,
you.
That's totally fine. Toy Story was what I was stumping for in earlier rounds, so I totally understand it.
That's right. And now we're going to ruin everything by bringing in movies that you don't want and didn't ask for. Welcome to the Good Dinosaur. Anyway, lastly, in round 2, another unanimous victory for 2 seed Coco, which sent 1 seed Monsters, Inc. to the great beyond of this bracket. And with that, we actually have our final 4. We're going to take a quick break to find out whoever saw and greenlit Toy Story 4. We will be right back after these messages. And we are back with the final 4 of our best Pixar film debate. At this point in the show, I always like to take a step back and look at the final 4 to see if it matches up with what I thought. But before we get to that, during our break, I was drubbed by my panelists because we kicked out Monsters, Inc. without even saying a word about it. So I want Amy to talk a little bit about Monsters, Inc. and why it's a special film and why you are sad to see it go.
John Goodman, Billy Crystal, Steve Buscemi. This film really did pack it in. Monsters, Inc. was very relatable to kids. It took this concept of monsters under your bed. Again, toys coming to life, monsters under your bed. These are common kid themes that speak to every child. But here they are flipping it on its head. It's not monsters that come and scare you. It's monsters that come and make you laugh. What could be more lovable? So hopefully for a lot of kids changes that monsters under the bed piece. So I think that Monsters deserves its flowers here.
I'm glad that you gave it its moment. But, Amy asked, who could want to meet a more lovable bunch of monsters? And I'm like, have you met my family? That's all I have to say. So with that being said, let's take a look at our final 4. It is Finding Nemo versus The Incredibles. Both they're 1 seeds. And then Toy Story, a 1 seed versus Coco, a 2 seed. Mostly, I think that is where I thought we would be, with the exception of Coco. I think we haven't talked at all about it yet, but I do think that our panelists feel very strongly about it, and for good reason. Let's jump into these battles. Finding Nemo versus The Incredibles, where I'm going to go around the horn. I'm going to start with Amma. Where are you on this one?
Finding Nemo.
Andrea.
Incredibles.
Amy.
Finding Nemo.
If we're going which one I like more, it would be The Incredibles. If I think it's which one was more important to overall Pixar, I think I go with Finding Nemo. I will say that I hold a grudge against Nemo because of the terrible Finding Nemo ride at Walt Disney World, where I got an awful sunburn. And the ride is terrible, by the way. It's terrible. Don't wait in line for it. But I do think I'm going to give it to Finding Nemo here. The Incredibles is awesome, and I think we've done a really great job explaining why it's a killer movie, a great franchise, and is a pinnacle of a certain family storytelling. But Finding Nemo is more critical, I think, to overall Pixar. Andrea, can you live with that?
Yeah, because I have a feeling I'm going to get downvoted in the next round, too. So let's go. Let's do this.
Let's do this. All right. So Finding Nemo advances to the final 2. It's Toy Story versus Coco. I'm going to go back of the pack. Andrea, where are you on this one?
Team Coco.
Okay. Amy, where are you?
I just want to say, Andrea, when we did the best Disney animated film, which included all of these, I had Coco in my final 4, maybe my final 2, actually. But because we're talking about Pixar and because of all the things I said before, I'm going to say Toy Story. But we could definitely talk about Coco regardless, because it is important and it falls, it is the reason. For all the reasons you think about WALL-E, I think that we got to Coco.
Amma.
Coco is gorgeous. Just absolutely stunningly beautiful, both in terms of aesthetics and how it was drawn, designed, the world that it opens it up to, but also the emotional piece of it, in the sense that so I am not a movie crier. My younger sister is absolutely a movie crier. She called me sobbing after she got out of Coco. So I was like, hello? And I just hear her sobbing, and I was like, did someone die? And she was like, you have to go see Coco. Wow. Okay.
The Swiss Miss? What's going on?
And it is. It's gorgeously emotional. The music is wonderful. I cried at the end of Coco more than once, and then a week later was just doing work in the library and started sobbing and didn't understand what was happening. And then I realized I was like, oh, it's the soundtrack. Like, you're just listening to music and starting to cry, and you weren't paying attention. It just snuck up on you. And again, to beat the drum of what you get when you allow diverse filmmakers to do what they're doing. This was something that was done in really close development with people who experienced this culture and for whom it was a part of them. And they had done a version of the film or the script beforehand and then came back and were like, this does not work. Someone has to be involved for whom this is lived experience. And you get an immensely superior film experience because of it. But again, if we're going for Best Pixar Film, that is, in a lot of ways, like WALL-E, a transcendent experience. It transcends the idea of, like, just, quote-unquote, just being a Pixar movie. So while I love Coco a great deal, Toy Story is still the one for me here.
Andrea, this is your pick. So why don't you speak about Coco? Because I'm on the fence here. I'll be very candid.
It's really hard to talk about this movie without wanting to start bawling, just because of the movie itself and because of recent personal events. But the movie itself, again, like with WALL-E, is more of a film than it is a movie. And I think Coco also sort of kicks off this next era of Pixar movies in the same way that WALL-E did. Or in the same way that The Incredibles did, especially when it comes to, like Amos pointed out, the diversity in filmmaking, especially within Disney Pixar. But this movie is just visually stunning. And what I love about that is it doesn't matter where you watch it. You could have watched it in the theater. You could watch it on your shitty TV at home. You could watch it on your phone. It's gorgeous no matter where you watch it. And you don't lose any of that. And it deals with death, obviously, in a very head-on sort of way without making it immensely sad. And that's kind of the whole theme about Dia de los Muertos, is that death should be a celebration of life. And the way that we honor those that have died and passed is by remembering them. And once you stop remembering them, then they're gone. And so it speaks to this idea that we have to remember our loved ones. And I think that's a very mature way to look at death for kids and for younger folks. Because it's very hard to explain death. You know, all you know is that this person is gone and they're not coming back. And I think it offers a different perspective on what happens after death versus the very white, Christian, Catholic centrist versions that we've been given throughout Disney Pixar history. All that being said, as far as Pixar films go, I really enjoy the different ways that we get to see how much we can stretch this animation style. When we're looking at Miguel, when he's in the afterlife and he's like looking at his hands and he can start see like his bones and everything, you can see through his skin and like all of like the muscles and everything. We haven't seen any sort of animation like that in Pixar up until that point. That's a very new mechanic. And just the way that like the bones move around and how people interact with each other. And lighting in this movie, I think, is very important, too, because there's not a lot of overhead lighting, which we all hate overhead lighting. It's a lot of candles and very gorgeous ambiance. And the way that they deal with the scenes between life and death as well. And, you know, kind of like how I stressed with WALL-E, we were sort of building up to this point of emotional storytelling and how far we can stretch the animation. And I just really love this movie personally. I could watch it every day and cry every day and be totally fine, but I won't be mad if y'all still want to vote for Toy Story. That's just gonna be my emotional rambling for Coco.
It's not rambling. I'm so glad that you shared all of it. I agree with everything. It is a deeply moving film. If you have not watched Coco, and it's like, I don't know if it's something that I'm going to enjoy, I loved it. It may be actually, as much as I love Turning Red, Coco may be my favorite film that I've seen on this top 16. Of these two films, regardless of which one is the better Pixar film, I have to vote for Coco here. And that's easy for me to do because it doesn't matter, because Toy Story is still a 1 seed and it will advance to the final 2. But I am going to throw, from my perspective, Coco really moved me and is an incredible work of digital animation, which is ultimately what Pixar is all about, a great work of digital animation. Toy Story got us there, but Coco is where we ended up. Amma and Amy, you still sticking with Toy Story? Amma?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Okay, so we will get to the final 2 of Finding Nemo versus Toy Story. I'm going to go around the horn. I'm going to start actually with Amy. Where do you go?
Toy Story.
Amma?
Toy Story.
Andrea?
Toy Story.
Yeah, to me, if our argument up to this point has been Toy Story is the most important one because it was the first one. And it's not just it's the first one, it's the correct first one, right? It was the perfect first movie for this studio. It makes no sense to give it to Finding Nemo if we've been saying that as the argument. What were we going to say, Amy?
I was just going to say that I think that if the way that this bracket fell out was unfortunate because Coco, WALL-E probably could have gone before Finding Nemo. We would have gotten rid of I think a lot of things would have shifted if this bracket fell out differently.
And that is the reason that you need to take the polls on greatpopculturedebate.com, folks, because your votes literally do make up our bracket. We don't come up with these on our own. They're by the voters. So that being said, you have it. Our pick for the best Pixar film is Toy Story. Do you agree? Do you think we're as creatively bankrupt as the Cars franchise? Sorry, Andrea. Tell us how you really feel by leaving a comment on this episode at greatpopculturedebate.com or find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Mastodon. While you're there, make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast so you can hear about what new debates are coming soon, vote in open polls, and even decide which topics we tackle next. And if you really enjoyed this episode, please take a minute to like and rate the episode of the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or whatever platform you listen on. I want to say thank you to my panel. I could not design a more delightful group of people with all the computers in the world. And thank you for listening. If you loved what you heard, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get even more exclusive content and you get episodes a whole day early. We hope you have a good one. And remember, everyone is entitled to their wrong opinion. No capes.